Hi, everyone, and happy Thursday. My name is Gihan Hyde, and I am the founder and CEO of CommUnique. We are an environmental, social, and governance, in other words, ESG advisory firm. We advise organizations in embedding sustainability initiatives within their business model to align with their purpose, but we also help them to communicate it effectively, train their employees on why they should be with you in the journey as an organization, and also to audit it. We are a B Corp certified, and I'm actually one of the equity growth advisors on B Corp myself. The objective of these half-hour sessions on Ask the ESG expert is to showcase that embedding sustainability and ESG within your organization is not really that difficult if you break it into small steps, but also to share with you best practices, challenges that you could be facing. If you're joining us for the first time, please do share and ask us as many questions as we have as you have online. My guest today is the one and only Francis Wade, and when we spoke first, I was overwhelmed by how amazing he is and how experienced he is in this field. And hence I had to say to him, please do come on board and join us. Francis, hi.
Hi, Gihan. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And before we begin, can you please introduce yourself and explain to others why you are the ESG expert?
Sure. I live in Kingston, Jamaica. I work as a management consultant. As you can hear from my voice, I'm neither English nor American, although I was born in the States. My company focuses on interweaving short and long-term strategic plans for our clients, and we've done this for about 20 years. And recently, I sat in a retreat with a forestry organization. This is the company that's in charge of all the forests for Jamaica. And we usually ask them to set strategic plans that are 15 to 30 years in the future. And they said, no, Francis, that's not enough for us. We need 40 years. And it's never happened before. But it was an epiphany for me because they needed that time to essentially save Jamaica's forests from extinction. They needed that amount of time in order to move the needle. And I thought about it afterwards and I said, we've been doing this for a long time. But each time we ask a company to look at the long term, they tend to become more environmentally conscious, more socially aware, and deal with their governance issues just by asking them to look at the long term. So in other words, they become more ESG friendly, so to speak, just because they're looking at the long term. And that's what brings me here.
Well, it's interesting because I actually agree with you. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you for commenting. But yes, we talk to a lot of clients at the moment. And what we do see is the fact that the majority of the clients or the people we talk to are not focusing on the long term when it comes to ESG because it's such a reactive action. Either they are forced to report on it by the regulators, or they're going through an upscaling process from an investor point of view, or they're forced to do so by their customers or by clients. But what we also realized is that they don't focus on the long term. But why do you think that? I mean, why are they not focusing on the long term? What do you think is the reason?
Well, there's a bunch of things that have happened because right after you go back in history, right after World War II, there was a huge focus on the long term. That was when the UN was started, the World Bank, the EU, a number of long-term organizations were started right after World War II because it was so awful that, in their wisdom, they said, we need to fix these long-term problems. Fast forward to the Apollo mission in the 1960s and sending the man to the moon. Kennedy said it's going to take us 10 years, and it took 10 years. And that was another long-term mission. But today, we have the combination of 9/11, which was a shock, the 2008 recession, another shock, COVID, inflation, a war, and we have a whole bunch of CEOs now who are being paid and incentivized by short-term measures. So they have stopped and lost the ability to look to the long term for their own business, let alone for the planet, and let alone for these long-term concerns. Because from our point of view, ESG is an encapsulation of long-term issues. It's three long-term issues, but there are others. And as you put them all together, you realize that companies have only focused on their short term. They focused on their, keeping their immediate investors, their hedge funds, their quarterly reports, their quarterly reporting. They've been out of fear, been focused on these short-term measures, and they've lost the commitment to develop long-term value for their companies and for us in the larger world, in society. So it's a double-barrel problem.
I wonder if it's also because they're not sure how to think long term. I wonder if it's also because the technology isn't there to help them to think long term, or the initiatives. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
Oh, you're absolutely right, because there's a whole thing. I don't know where it came from, right? That says that putting together a long-term strategy takes you 6 months, and then you got to hire McKinsey. So they think it's expensive and it takes a really long time and it's hard and we don't know how. And why even bother? Because after you've created a strategy, we live in a VUCA world, and some believe that it's the first time this has ever happened, that the world has been so volatile.
Yeah.
And that's not true. But the belief is that if we create a long-term strategy, we'll have to change it. Well, that's no different than it was in 1945. It's just that we think we're special, and we talk about long-term strategy as if we're different. We don't need it. We don't, and so then we forget how to do it, and we don't pay attention. But thank goodness there's technology that'll help us to do it better than it used to be done 40 years ago.
But that's the thing. I genuinely don't understand why people fear long-term strategies. I agree with you. I mean, you can always pivot. I don't understand why can't you just pivot? If your strategy is faulted in any way, pivot.
Right.
That's the whole idea of having a strategy, is literally having a North Star. And this is what I've always said to our clients. When you want to embed ESG or even sustainability, because there is by the way, and there is differences between two of them. Sustainability is the initiatives that bring your ESG data to life, basically. I always say to them, there is nothing wrong with you committing to a long-term sustainability commitment. And then if you're not getting to the commitment on time, admit it. Admit that you are not getting there yet, and that the reasons why you're not getting to achieve your strategy on time is 1, 2, 3, and 4. Because transparency is key here. If you're transparent, if you're clear, I think you can actually be forgiven for not matching or reaching your commitment. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree, because if you compare a short-term strategy and a long-term strategy, the fact is you're going to change the short-term strategy all the time. The long-term strategy changes far fewer times or less frequently, because it, as you said, it's the North Star, it's the true north. You don't change that very often, but the short-term strategy you change a lot. But the way I hear some executives talk, it's as if, oh no, we don't want to create the long-term strategy because it's going to have to change, but it's not going to change more than the short-term strategy. So again, it's a kind of a muddled way of thinking. And unfortunately, it leads companies to greenwash, because we have companies, I'm sure you've seen them. I'm sure our audience has seen them. Companies that tell you that they have a 2050 commitment to reduce the carbon footprint, right? But they only have a 5-year strategic plan for their business. And you're like, isn't that greenwashing? Hold on a minute. You try to tell me that you have this long-term commitment to one thing, but your own business, you don't have anything more than a 5-year strategy, then the chances of you ditching the long-term ESG commitments are high, because that's not material to your business. It's not the inside of your business. What's inside of your business is profit, is the well-being of your staff, are the immediate short-term measures. And so it's unfortunately a form of hypocrisy. And hopefully we can end that, right? By by sharing the message that we're sharing today.
But then what's wrong with a 5-year plan? I mean, what would be a long-term plan for you or strategy?
Well, we recommend 15 to 30. And if you ask someone like Jeff Bezos says the reason he could beat his competition is because they had 3-year plans and he had 7-year plans. So just in terms of competition, when you have a longer term strategy, you can beat the guy who has a shorter term strategy because he or she, they're not looking to at a long enough horizon to be able to beat your strategy.
Okay.
So Amazon is well known for its patient money, its patience in setting up commitments and then allowing them to come to fruition decade or two later because they're thinking that far ahead. So all the companies that they used to compete with back in, remember when Amazon was losing money back in the late 90s and everybody was laughing at Bezos? It was like a joke, right? It's hard to remember even that we all thought it was a joke. That this company selling books was losing money like crazy. And he just kept saying, we're not in it for the short haul, we're in it for the long haul, because he saw that books were just the beginning of where they are today. But back then it was a huge joke. And anybody investing in Amazon, you kind of looked at them funny because you're like, that company's losing money every year and they have no hope in sight. Well, they did have hope in sight. So he's a great example of extending the horizon and therefore being more strategic and being able to make a bigger difference.
I actually also think having a 15-year or a 30-year strategy, which is, by the way, it's not common behavior or common practice. I have yet to hear anyone do that. Right. It actually enables you to also have time to upskill your employees, to identify what the gaps are in your business model. And then that takes us very, very nicely to Barbuta. Hi, Barbuta, from Bucharest, when she's asking about governing, how are they being governed? I think productivity and employee skill set and upskilling is super important.
Right.
What do you think?
Oh, yeah, and technology and all of these long-term effects. When you look at a long enough horizon, you're able to think of all of them at the same time, which is what good leadership and creating long-term value requires. You need to take into account all the factors, not just the ones that impact you in the short term. Because, for example, Apple saw the advent of the internet and saw how it was going to change telephony, mobile telephony. BlackBerry didn't see it. And no, BlackBerry doesn't exist because they weren't looking far enough in the future to see what was coming. They looked at the first iPhone, and I hear they had a big laugh because they thought it was nonsense, because they couldn't see what was coming far enough in the future. So they destroyed long-term value. I think it was $7 billion US of value and 30,000 employees, all destroyed in a matter of years. Kodak is another example, but we know these examples because at one point all of us had Blackberries and nobody has one.
So gosh, do you remember those days? Oh my God, I forgot about the Blackberries actually.
Remember that?
Oh my God, and how fiddly they were and oh gosh, I forgot about those. Yes.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you don't pay attention. That's what happens to any company in the planet that doesn't look at all of these forces at the same time with a view to creating long-term value. Alex Edmonds is brilliant in talking about the need to create and focus on long-term value. That's what investors want. That's what employees want. All the stakeholders want it. It's the executives that either don't know how to do it, to your point, or they're afraid to do it, or they're greedy because they're getting paid in short-term stock options.
Yes. Yeah. And the lack of skill sets, to be fair. It's very difficult to predict something that doesn't exist if you don't have the right people on board who are visionary and who would be with you along the line. And especially when it comes to sustainability and climate change and the crisis we're going through, we really can't predict other than the worst case scenario. To achieve and to even get and play our part in saving our planet. There was a survey by PwC recently for the CEOs globally, and guess what? 94% of the people the CEOs who were interviewed said we don't know or understand anything about climate change or sustainability. Our skill sets are purely financial and strategic. But when it comes to such a technical topic, we don't have that. And that's fine. To be honest, it's fine. I can accept that because that's what a good leader would be. You need to have the right teams behind you,
right,
who can uplift you, who can help you to understand. And that's why we always come. The first thing we do when we enter an organization, we upskill the leadership teams.
okay,
We explain to them what does sustainability mean versus what is ESG. We explain to them what are the regulations that are coming their way that would affect their operations, because sometimes, so there is now a new law or a new sustainability regulation called CSRD,
okay,
and that's going to affect 50,000 companies based in Europe. And it's also going to affect companies who are not based in Europe, so like, for example, like Jamaica, but
right.
who will be trading with European companies. That's a huge threat coming your way. But it's
Wow,
okay,
yeah.
as long as you
I
are
remember hearing about this EU law that was coming into effect, but I didn't realize it had a knock-on effect on other companies in the world that do business with
Oh,
the
yes.
EU.
Oh, yes. It's really, the majority of our clients are now coming to us saying, this is coming. We will need to reevaluate our products, our services, and our procurement in order for us to trade in the EU or to exist in the EU. So this is why a lot of our clients are now coming to us to help them demystify this.
Right.
But yeah, so tell me more. We have a question here from Jerry. He's asking, is there value to a 10-year plan with a roll forward mechanism that allows you for a yearly add-on as you go? Is there value for this?
Absolutely. The challenge, if you keep the horizon fixed, is that employees who join the company near the end of the horizon only experience like a 2-year strategy because they joined year 8.
Okay.
And you want to keep everyone looking over the horizon in a long-term orientation. So to Jerry's point, there's a lot of value in refreshing and extending the horizon. But at the same time, there's also a value, because it's not a black and white kind of answer. There's also value in having one big overall overarching goal, and then training those people who join, to your point, skilling them to realize that they're a part of a movement. So there's a company in Jamaica that had a 25-year strategy, and it allowed them to leapfrog their competition, which the competition disappeared in that time frame. They got rid of a bunch of companies which no longer fit the vision, and today they're a powerhouse, and they're in several countries, including the UK and the US, all because of their 25-year commitment. Now, what it took to get to that point is some of the things that you're saying, which is that they didn't have expertise in-house to do the kind of things that they needed to do, or to understand the impact of, for example, technology on fintech, because they wanted to become a fintech company. They were a food company, but they wanted to do enter fintech, finance. So they, over 25 years, they did exactly what you said. They hired the individuals, they trained them, so they began to understand the impact of technology and finance in the long term. And now they're a powerhouse. But it didn't happen overnight. It comes from this small, steady investment. And you're absolutely right. We can't expect the CEO to appreciate all of these impacts by himself or herself. He needs a team, or she needs a team. But the team needs to be in a long-term orientation. And usually the people who report to a CEO are very short-term oriented, as you know.
Yeah.
They're the people who, they're making profits from one day to the next. They're telling you what the sales were yesterday. They're looking at super short-term financial metrics, and their head is buried in these numbers. So it takes work, the kind of work that you were talking about when you go in and work with a team, to get them to develop these other areas of expertise, because the company needs people who know something about, like, for example, here in the Caribbean, we need experts who know something about the change in our climate. So we're getting more hurricanes, and bigger hurricanes than we ever had in the past.
Okay.
So I worked with one company, for example. It was a fruit company, they grow bananas. And they put together their long-term strategy after a hurricane. The second hurricane hit and wiped out their crop. And they said, we can't do this anymore. So they pivoted. They pivoted. They did a bunch of changes that they needed to make to survive future hurricanes. They diversified their risk, for example. They started planting in other countries. They moved to snack manufacturer, which is easier on the bottom line than fruit manufacture. But they had to also develop people who were experts, people who could speak Spanish. They had to buy a company in the Dominican Republic. They had to do all of these things. A long-term orientation towards solving a climate change challenge. And that's the kind of thing. If you don't have people who are minded that way, then you just go and replant and just say, well, this time we'll hope for the best, harder. And maybe the hurricane won't come this year. And you end up in that kind of reactive mode, which destroys value. And you become like a Kodak.
But this is the thing. I mean, I absolutely agree with Edison and Barbuta. When you become a sustainable, and by the way, I really don't like the word sustainability. And if you know me well, you'll know that for me, the word sustainability is being used in several wrong ways. For me, sustainability is all about people and planet. It's easier to just say people and planet. But embedding a people and planet strategy within a company is an opportunity. And also, it should not put, it's not about competition. It's about competition. Actually, you will be competitive, by the way, Edison, because you'll be taking the right opportunities that would put you and spearhead you as a market share leader. So to give you an example, one of our clients, one of the opportunities that they have found is the fact that if they upskill the employees to understand what climate change means and what a carbon footprint means to them as employees, they then can use the data from the employees' carbon footprint towards their scope 3 emission calculations. So that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity to showcase that not only are we people and planet focused, but we're also helping our employees to come with us by reducing their carbon footprint. And this is the data that showcases. So that's an opportunity. Another opportunity could be using and changing your product slightly to save money on the long run. On the short run, yes, it's going to be expensive to change, let's say, from plastic to metal. But on the long run, it will actually be more profitable. And the data is not lying. Around 76% of companies who are sustainable or people and planet focused are actually more profitable than non-sustainable and people and planet focused.
The forestry company that I mentioned before, they had to invent a whole host of new metrics in order to track the impact that they could have, because the old metrics were putting them into a dead end. They couldn't improve what really needed to be improved. But understanding the impact on the planet and the contribution and the subtraction of carbon that forests make, they have to measure different things in order to understand the impact. So changing even the way you think about what success means.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with the balance scorecard and the strategy map, this is for those of us who are in the know. We had to create a new kind of strategy map for them that had at the very top financial and a forestry impact. I think we called it forestry impact or something like that. But it had its own measures, which they had to invent during the retreat because there were no measures. They don't exist in the world to capture the impact that they needed to track in order to make the difference that they wanted to the forest cover here in Jamaica.
And did it work? The new
map? It's now being implemented. Yeah. This was recently, so it will take us about 10 years to know, I guess.
I'll call you after 10 years to see where you are in that journey. How about that? Yeah, I think that.
What they can do though is that they can make a better case for what they're doing to the government, so they can ask for the right kind of funding, which they had a challenge doing before, but they can now do it because they have better measures. So the government can then say, oh, the numbers are moving in the right direction because now we know what success looks like.
But from my experience, governments don't move unless they're pressured by the businesses. So for us to change
Right.
regulations, the businesses need to lead on it. Governments
Right.
don't change easily. Hence, we
No.
are on all the standards for ESG reporting is everywhere. Like at this moment of time, as we speak, the investors who are looking at the ESG scoring and the data, they're not comparing apples to apples. They're comparing apples to oranges.
Right. Right. Well, I will confess though, we are so lucky in Jamaica in this regard. Why?
Oh, tell me
Because
more.
we
Why?
currently have an 11-year plan for Jamaica. So many countries around the world in the 2010s and 20s put together these long-term visions for their countries. And we were one of them. So we have Jamaica 2030, which, sorry, it was a 21-year strategy. Sorry, my math was wrong. A 21-year vision for where we wanted to head as a country. And fortunately, our prime minister is extremely environmentally friendly, and
Ah,
so is his minister of I think it's industry or anyway, one of the one of the ones that heads up the forestry area. He heads up many ministries. He's extremely environmentally friendly. So we've never had it this good in Jamaica. So I'll confess that we're so lucky to have this lineup of, like, the stars are just aligning in the right way. But when it comes to pressuring a government, I actually believe in the grassroots approach, which is that everyone who listens to us today shouldn't shouldn't stop and just say, well, my company should. I say we need a movement of long-term thinking, and it should be in every NGO, every nonprofit, every church, every club, Rotary, Kiwan, those are service organizations, every school, every alumni organization, all of them should have a long-term strategy. If you do that, then we'll no longer elect politicians who have a short-term orientation.
yes.
We need to do our part. We all need to play our part, and it'll eventually accrue to a change in thinking away from short-termism, which will have the biggest impact on ESG and all of the other long-term issues that we see are going in the wrong direction. But it's got to start at the grassroots level. It's got to start with me and you, and pushing ourselves to push people around us who we are in organizations with to think in the long term. That's where it's got to start.
But then education plays a massive key for this.
Sure
You
does.
can't expect you and me who don't know how to think strategically to all of a sudden wake up and think that way. We need to
Right.
start somewhere. We either educate ourselves to see, okay, there is a gap that needs to be filled. We're going to go and fill it, or we can then the organizations can then help us to think strategically. So it's like it's a catch-22. It's a chicken and
Right.
egg. Where do you start? Who do you start
Right.
with?
Well, here I
And
can
for
make a
me, that's
pitch.
the question.
Here I can make a pitch for longtermstrategy.info, which is my website, and we're offering resources there. And I write in the Jamaica newspaper every 2 weeks on issues related to long-term strategy and productivity. So I'm trying to get the education and the thinking out there. But it is, you said at the beginning, people have sort of forgotten how to do long-term strategy and long-term thinking. Our world has become so short-term oriented over the last, let's say, the last 20 years, that we need large-scale education. This, if we went back to Kennedy would be laughing at us saying, what? We already did that. You're still trying to think long-term. I did that for you guys, and what have you done with it? And we'd say, oh, we're sorry, President Kennedy, you told us, it took 10 years to get a man on the moon, and that was long-term thinking, and we should have followed that, but we didn't. So
Well,
we
that's
used to
the
think
thing.
this way. The question is, how can we bring that kind of thinking so that, it's not very different from asking a child who is 10, what do you want to be when you grow up? The child doesn't say, well, I only think 5 years at a time.
Exactly. Oh gosh,
Oh, Chancellor, I want to be a doctor and a lawyer and a fireman. So there's something natural about long-term committing and long-term aspirations.
yeah,
But there's something that happens when we join corporations and we become financially oriented and short-term oriented that kills that natural tendency. So I like to think of it as fostering what's naturally there. We want big things. People want to join a company that has a purpose and a long-term purpose, not just a short-term, we're trying to meet our ESG numbers this year. No, because that's washing. No, we want to change the planet, but how? Well,
yeah,
let's talk about where we're taking the company long-term and then look at the impact
yeah.
that that'll have on all of the factors that we have influence over.
Well, Francis, thank you so much. We definitely ran over time, but I mean, we can listen to you for at least 3-4 hours. So thank you for your time, and everyone, thank you so much for joining us and for your participations. There are a couple of questions that haven't been answered. I'm sure Francis will go back and answer you, and I will also try my best to answer it in a very clear way. See you next week, same time, 12 p.m. UK time. You take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Gihan.
Thank you.